For decades, the haughty remarks of former U.S. Treasury Secretary John Connally have been proven correct. On the 2nd of this month, the U.S. Federal Reserve announced a further rate increase of 75 basis points. The Federal Reserve has increased interest rates 6 times in a row since March of this year, and the federal funds rate in the U.S. reached its highest point since January 2008. Globally, the aggressive interest rate increases by the Fed and the significant rise in the value of the U.S. dollar have had negative and detrimental effects. Currency devaluation, capital outflows, rising debt payment costs, higher import inflation, and even currency or debt crises have been experienced by many nations. For a very long time, the U.S. has frequently exploited the U.S. dollar's hegemonic position in the global monetary system to transfer local problems, reap global wealth, and threaten the economic and financial stability of other nations. The U.S. dollar's hegemonic position has grown to be a significant source of instability for the global economy, building demolition, missile bombardment, whistling warplanes, and deaths of civilians to assist the Libyan opposition in toppling the Gaddafi dictatorship. The U.S. and its allies commenced airstrikes against Libyan government troops in March 2011. Some scholars have noted that, in addition to geopolitical issues, one of the reasons Libya suffered the hit was earlier Gaddafi's proposal to challenge the dominance of the U.S. dollar by refusing to use it for trade transactions. In the final stages of World War, a U.S. dollar gained global control. The U.S. used the Second World War as an excuse to stockpile a lot of gold and was instrumental in establishing the Bretton Woods system, which pegged the dollar to gold and made the dollar a reserve currency for the whole world. After the Bretton Woods system broke down in the 1970s, the U.S. used the unrest in the Middle East and used the need for security in the region's oil, producing nations to intimidate them into linking the U.S. currency to oil, creating the petrodollar system. The founding, consolidation, and development of the dollar hegemony from the gold dollar to the petrodollar have a distinct war brand. The dominance of the U.S. dollar in the financial world reflects thus global hegemony and is a significant source of funding for it. Keeping the U.S. dollar dominant means keeping the U.S. in control of the global economy. The United States has not hesitated to employ any available measures, including armed battles, financial warfare, and trade wars, in order to accomplish this aim. It has also not hesitated to target any nation, even its own friends. Early in the 1980s, Japan's expanding trade surplus with the U.S. contributed to the yen's internationalization and increased us unease. The Plaza Accord was signed at New York City's Plaza Hotel in September 1985 by the finance ministers and central bank governors of the United States, France, Federal Republic of Germany, Japan, and the United Kingdom. After that, Japan's exports suffered, the yen rose significantly versus the US dollar, and then economic risks shot up. This served as a significant catalyst for the Japanese economy to enter a protracted recession, which delayed the yen's internationalization. With the introduction of the euro on January 1st, 1999, and an initial exchange rate of around 1 to 1.18 against the dollar, Europe strengthened its internal power and challenged the dominance of the dollar. A little more than 2 months later, on the pretext of preventing a humanitarian calamity in Kosovo, the U.S. directed NATO to attack the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia without approval, sparking a war in Kosovo. The conflict caused a significant exodus of foreign money from Europe, and by the end of 1999, the euro's value relative to the US dollar had fallen to less than 1 to 1. Iraq declared in 2000 that it will switch from paying for its oil exports in US dollars to using the euro instead. On the grounds that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, the US attacked Iraq in 2003 and toppled Saddam's government. The U.S. military assaults against Iraq, Libya, and other nations, according to the Spanish daily Intifada, were carried out in part because of Washington's ambition to maintain the petrodollar system that sustains its debts in the supremacy of the dollar as the major trading currency. A well-known pattern is currently being repeated. Since this year, the Fed's aggressive interest rate rises and the deepening of the Ukraine crisis have been manipulating the U.S. Major non-U.S. currencies like the euro, the yen, and the pound have fallen sharply, but the dollar has been able to maintain its status as a safe haven asset. Exorbitant privilege. In his book, The Dollar Trap, Cornell University economics professor Eswar Prasad discusses the predatory character of the dollar's hegemony. According to him, the U.S. has been able to enjoy the splurge at the expense of other countries because to the dollar's supremacy. In order to further U.S. interests, the Federal Reserve has traditionally manipulated currency movements to gain economic gains from other nations. Large sums of money moved throughout the globe during an expansionary phase of U.S. monetary policy, causing asset price bubbles and producing high appreciation rates. The adverse effects of a severe depreciation of the local currency and a drop in asset prices are left to other nations when the U.S. monetary policy enters a contractionary cycle. The Federal Reserve adopted a low-interest rate policy during the start of the oil crisis in the 1970s in order to promote employment and investment while easing the U.S. debt load through the depreciation of the U.S. currency. In order to break the Middle East monopoly on oil production at the time, the U.S. mobilized a number of Latin American and African nations to join in oil exploration and extraction. These nations then borrowed significant sums of money from low-interest dollar loans for this reason. The Federal Reserve abruptly increased interest rates in the late 1970s and early 1980s, which caused the U.S. currency to appreciate and the price of oil to decrease. As a result, these nations entered a debt crisis, which was later exacerbated by other factors. Following the global financial crisis in 2008, the Federal Reserve implemented quantitative easing and issued copious amounts of paper currency. Inflation in the U.S. has stayed low for many years since then, despite the fact that monetary overissuance often causes inflation to rise. This is due to the fact that the majority of the extra money were diverted to other nations through investments in their properties and the importation of their commodities rather than remaining in the U.S. The U.S. passed inflation along with its theft of money from other nations. The U.S. also borrows money from abroad to pay down its debt since the dollar serves as a global reserve currency. A sizable market for assets denominated in U.S. dollars enables extensive external recycling of US liabilities. According to U.S. Treasury figures, the U.S. federal government's debt reached over $31 trillion as of October this year, significantly exceeding the country's gross domestic product, which was over $23 trillion last year. Because the U.S. government cannot possibly repay such a significant quantity of debt, it has asked the Federal Reserve to issue a sizable amount of new dollars to immediately pay off its debt and lessen the burden of its external debt. Former French President Charles de Gaulle had said that the U.S. had obscene affluence and deficit without tears built half a century prior. Charles de Gaulle, a former president of France, had noted that the U.S. enjoyed obscene privilege and deficit without tears caused by the dollar and utilized the worthless paper note to pillage the resources and industries of other countries 50 years prior. His understanding of the predominance of the U.S. currency is still relevant today. The yen's lowest level versus the dollar since August 1990 was reached on October 20 of this year, requiring the Japanese government to interfere in the currency market. A reverse currency war, in which the U.S. president himself has entered the conflict, has engulfed Japan. In the past, currency wars typically referred to countries competing to devalue their currencies in order to boost exports and propel growth. In the present, reverse currency wars typically refer to countries urging their currencies to appreciate in order to reduce inflationary pressures brought on by rising import prices. The globe is in upheaval due to the dollar's rise. In light of the Federal Reserve's aggressive interest rate increases, Japan is concerned. A dreadful harvest has befallen non-dollar currencies in general, not just the yen and the surging dollar. In relation to the dollar, both the euro and the pound have dropped to historic lows, and emerging market currencies have also taken a beating. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and click on these videos to watch more about secret news you didn't know about.